He lost his sight in an accident that stole everything, his dreams, his empire, his hope. Until one day, a poor girl entered his life and said, "I'll be your eyes." But what she showed him wasn't the world, it was life itself. "Would you help someone who's already given up?" The mansion stood silent at the edge of the city, its windows sealed, curtains drawn, and lights dimmed even in daylight. Inside, a young billionaire sat in darkness that no sunrise could break. His name was Ethan Vale, heir to one of the largest tech empires in the country. A man who once built the devices that help people see the world more clearly, until irony took that very gift away from him. A car crash 2 years ago had cost him his sight. Since then, the world had become a shadow of memories, a place where he lived but didn't exist. His wealth could buy anything except light. "Mr. Vale," the nurse said softly that morning, "your breakfast is ready." Ethan nodded without expression. "Just leave it." His tone was distant, his face calm, too calm. People often said blindness had changed him, made him colder, quieter. But in truth, Ethan wasn't quiet because he was cold. He was quiet because he was tired. Tired of pity. Tired of people pretending they cared. Tired of hearing footsteps that always walked away. That afternoon, his caretaker mentioned something unusual. A new housemaid had been assigned by the agency. "She's young," the woman said hesitantly, "but she needed the job badly. I told her this place isn't easy." Ethan gave a faint, humorless smile. No place is easy when there's nothing left to see. Later that evening, he heard light footsteps echo down the marble hallway. They were soft, uncertain, but determined. Then came a knock on his study door. "Come in," he said. The door creaked open. "Good evening, sir," said a gentle voice. There was something warm in her tone, unpolished but sincere. "I'm Ava. The agency sent me to help with housekeeping." Ethan tilted his head slightly. "You sound nervous." "A little," she admitted. "It's my first day. I've never worked in a place this big before." "Most people haven't," he replied. "Don't get lost," she chuckled quietly. That small sound, so ordinary yet so alive, stirred something faint in Ethan's chest. For months, his house had been filled only with silence and routine. Now there was life again, even if it came from someone dusting bookshelves he could no longer read. As the evening went on, Ethan listened to her hum while cleaning. It wasn't a song he knew, but her voice carried something rare: hope. He didn't interrupt, didn't speak, he just listened. For the first time in a long while, silence didn't hurt. The next day, Ava returned early. She spoke to him while she worked, filling the empty mansion with stories of the world outside. The sound of the market crowd, the smell of rain, the way the sunlight hit the river. She described everything as if painting it with words. "Why do you talk so much?" Ethan asked once, half amused. "Because," she said softly, "you need to remember what the world feels like, not just what it looks like." Those words struck him deeper than she knew. For years, people pitied his blindness, but Ava, she didn't pity him. She treated him like a person who had simply closed his eyes. Slowly, her presence became the one thing he waited for. She wasn't afraid of his silence, his scars, or the way he sometimes stumbled over his cane. Instead, she saw beyond it, and somehow made him see again. One afternoon, she accidentally dropped a glass near him. Ethan, out of reflex, reached toward the sound, and their hands touched. Just for a moment, but it was enough. Enough to remind him he was still alive. Ava gasped softly, but didn't pull away immediately. Then she whispered, "You found it faster than I did." He smiled faintly. Sound travels faster than fear. That evening, as she prepared to leave, she turned back at the door and said, "Good night, Mr. Vale." He hesitated before replying. "Good night, Ava." The words felt strange and gentle, unfamiliar, but right. As the door closed, Ethan leaned back in his chair. For the first time in 2 years, he smiled. Not because he could see her, but because he didn't need to. The next morning began differently. Ethan woke not to silence, but to the faint hum of a broom sweeping softly in the hallway. He listened for a moment, realizing how much he had come to rely on sound to paint his world. Each step, each rustle, each breath, it all formed an invisible picture around him. "Good morning, Mr. Vale," Ava said cheerfully from the doorway. "You're up early." "I couldn't sleep," he replied, his voice rough from the night. "Too many thoughts." "Thoughts are good," she said gently. "It means your mind still has something to say." He almost smiled. No one had ever spoken to him like that. Most people treated him like fragile glass. Ava, on the other hand, spoke as if he were still the man who once built an empire. As she moved around the study, dusting the shelves, she began to describe the sunrise. "The sky looks like it's been set on fire," she said. "Pale gold near the horizon, deep orange spreading above it, the kind of morning that makes you forget the night ever existed." Ethan closed his eyes as if seeing it through her words. "I used to wake up early just for that," he murmured. "The sun over the city. I could see my reflection in the glass windows downtown." "Maybe you still can," she said. "Just not with your eyes." Something in her tone, simple yet profound, stayed with him the entire day. Over the next few weeks, Ava became more than a housemaid. She was his window to the world. When she spoke, he imagined colors again. When she described laughter, he could almost hear it beyond the walls. And when she told him about her life, it didn't sound like pity, it sounded like truth. She lived in a small apartment near the train station with her younger brother, Noah. Their parents were gone, and she worked multiple jobs to keep food on the table. Yet she always smiled when she talked about him. "He wants to be an engineer someday," she said. "Maybe work for your company." Ethan tilted his head toward her. "Vale Innovations?" "Yes." She laughed softly. "He says your robots are like magic." Ethan smiled faintly. "They're not magic, they're logic." "Sometimes," she said, "the world needs both." Ava had a way of turning even the simplest sentences into something that stayed with him. That afternoon, Ethan's old business partner, Lucas Trent, came to visit. Lucas was everything Ethan used to be. Confident, fast-talking, always moving. "Ethan, my friend," Lucas said loudly as if his blindness made him deaf. "Still hiding in the dark, huh?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "I don't hide, Lucas. I adapt," Lucas chuckled. "Same thing." Ava stood quietly near the door, wiping the table. Lucas's gaze flickered toward her. "New staff?" he asked. Ethan nodded. "Yes, she's been helping around." Lucas smirked, pretty voice. "She's also hardworking," Ethan said sharply. Lucas raised his hands in mock surrender. "Easy, I was just saying." When Lucas left, Ethan sat in silence for a long while. Ava hesitated, then said softly, "He doesn't understand you." "No," Ethan said, his tone distant. "He never did." "Then stop proving yourself to people like him," she said. "Start proving it to yourself." That night, Ethan lay awake, her words echoing in his mind. Days turned into weeks, and something began to change in the house. The air felt lighter, the silence no longer suffocated him. Ava had unknowingly filled the emptiness with presence. She read to him sometimes. Old poetry, newspaper articles, even children's stories her brother liked. Her laughter drifted through the mansion like sunlight through dust. Ethan began to ask her questions about the world outside. What people wore, how they moved, what colors the sky wore before rain. And one evening, when she described a red dress in a store window, Ethan asked, "Would it suit you?" Ava laughed nervously. Me? I can't afford to look at that dress, let alone wear it. Describe it again, he said softly. It's bright, she said, like a flame that refuses to die. Then yes, he murmured. It would suit you perfectly. A silence followed, gentle, unspoken, but heavy with something new. From that day on, Ethan started listening not just with his ears, but with his heart. Every sound she made, her laughter, her footsteps, even her quiet sighs, became the rhythm of his unseen world. He realized he was smiling more, standing taller, even walking with less hesitation. But with that change came fear. Because deep down he knew he was starting to depend on her too much. And Ethan Vale had built his entire life on never needing anyone. One evening as she was leaving, Ava paused at the door. Mr. Vale, she said. Yes? You don't have to pretend you're unbreakable. He frowned slightly. What makes you think I am? Because, she said gently, you don't let anyone touch your pain. You guard it like it's a secret. Ethan turned his head slightly toward her voice. Some secrets, he whispered, are safer in the dark. Ava didn't reply, but the look on her face, if he could have seen it, was one of quiet understanding. That night, when Ethan sat alone in the silence of his room, he realized something strange. He missed her voice, he missed the sound of her footsteps, the way she described the sunrise, the hope she carried like a lantern in his darkness. And for the first time in 2 years, he wanted to see again. Not the world, not his wealth, but her. Winter crept into the mansion quietly. The air turned colder, but for once Ethan didn't mind. Every morning began with the soft sound of Ava's voice reading aloud. Every night ended with her laughter echoing faintly down the hall. What had once been a house of shadows now felt alive again. But Ethan also knew something had changed inside him, something dangerous. He was falling for the only person who saw him without eyes. One evening after finishing her chores, Ava found him sitting near the fireplace. The flames cast faint warmth over his face. His sightless eyes reflected their glow. You shouldn't sit so close, she said softly. You'll burn yourself. I used to love fire, Ethan murmured. It reminded me of ambition, of everything I thought I could control. And now, she asked quietly, now it reminds me that some things still make me feel alive. She sat beside him, hesitant. For a while, neither of them spoke. Only the crackle of fire filled the silence. Then, almost in a whisper, Ethan said, Ava, tell me something honest, honest, she repeated, anything. She thought for a moment, then said quietly, I'm scared of leaving here. Ethan's brows furrowed. Why? Because I don't think I'll ever meet someone who listens the way you do. He turned toward her voice, every heartbeat louder than the next. Then don't leave, he said simply. She smiled sadly. You know I can't stay forever. Life doesn't stop for either of us. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words refused to come. The next day, Lucas returned unannounced. His tone was sharp and impatient. Ethan, you've been ignoring the board for weeks, he said. Investors are nervous, you're slipping away. Ethan remained calm. I'm not slipping, I'm choosing. Choosing what isolation? Sympathy from your housemaid. The words stung deeper than he expected. Ava, standing in the hallway, froze. Lucas continued, his voice cruel. You're blind, Ethan. You don't see that she's probably here for the paycheck or your name. Stop. Ethan's voice was low and steady, but filled with warning. You don't know her. I know people, Lucas snapped. And no one stays beside a broken man unless they need something. That night, Ava didn't come to read. Her absence was louder than any sound. By morning, Ethan found a folded letter on the table. The scent of her perfume clung faintly to the paper. Mr. Vale, I'm sorry for leaving without goodbye. But your world doesn't need someone like me in it. You gave me courage I didn't know I had. I hope you find light again. even if it isn't through me, Ava. He stood there for a long time, the silence pressing against his chest. The mansion felt empty again, worse than before because now he knew what warmth felt like. Days passed, weeks. He tried to focus on his work, his company, but her voice echoed in every corner. One night during a heavy rainstorm, he walked to the piano in the drawing room. His fingers, hesitant at first, found their way to the keys. The melody was broken, uneven, until suddenly a second voice joined in, soft humming, familiar.
"Ava," he whispered. Her laughter, small and trembling, answered him.
"You really shouldn't walk alone in storms," she said. "You'll catch a cold." He turned toward her voice, his chest tightening. "Why did you come back?" "Because," she said, stepping closer, "I realized something. You might not see the world, Ethan, but you feel it. You make everyone around you feel it too. And I was foolish to think I could walk away from that." He reached out slowly, unsure, until his hand brushed hers. Her fingers were cold but real. He held on as if afraid she'd disappear again. "Lucas was wrong," she whispered. "I didn't stay for money. I stayed because somewhere between your silence and your strength I found peace." Ethan's voice was rough when he finally spoke. "And I stayed in the dark because I thought I deserved it." He took a breath, "But maybe it's time to see again. Not with my eyes, but with my heart." She smiled through tears. "Then let me be your light." For the first time in years, Ethan felt something he thought he'd lost forever. Hope. Not the kind that comes with wealth or success, but the quiet kind that grows in broken places. Months later, the surgery was scheduled. It was risky. There was no guarantee of sight, but Ava stood beside him through every test, every sleepless night. "Whatever happens," she said, holding his hand before the operation, "you've already seen more than most people ever will." When he awoke days later, bandages still covering his eyes, he heard her voice first. "Ethan?" He reached for her hand. "You're here. Always." The doctor entered quietly. "Mr. Vale, it's time." The bandages came off slowly. Light burned through the darkness like fire across an endless horizon. He blinked, tears streaming down his face. Shapes began to form. The blur of walls, the outline of a window, and finally, her. Ava standing before him, eyes full of hope and fear all at once. He whispered, almost in disbelief, "You're even more beautiful than I imagined." She laughed through her tears. "And you're even more stubborn than I thought." The world around him felt new again. Every shadow, every color, every breath, it was all alive. And in that moment, Ethan Vale realized something. Sight had been taken from him to teach him what truly mattered. He had lost the world only to find his own. As they stood together by the window, sunlight spilling across the floor, Ava looked at him and said, "So, what do you see now?" He smiled softly. "Everything that's worth seeing." And with that, the blind billionaire who once lived in darkness finally stepped into the light. Not because his eyes could see, but because his heart finally did. The end.